what is healthy grief? Healthy grief is essentially what we're saying is a release of emotion. It's getting it out, but in a healthy way, using healthy coping skills, kind of looking yourself in the mirror, reflecting on it, inviting God into it, right?
Yes.
Is essentially what that is all about.
Absolutely.
What's up, guys? We're back for episode 3. We just want to thank you for tuning in to episode 1 and 2. It's been pretty amazing to see the feedback. Hey guys, it's Brittany. I'm an associate marriage and family therapist practicing here in California, and we're so excited that you're listening to our podcast. We hope and pray it's been encouraging and just inspiring you through your healing journey. We do want to make a disclaimer though. The content and conversations that we're having are strictly for psychoeducational purposes and shouldn't take the place of therapy. But we're happy to support you if you're looking for a therapist or looking for resources in the area. We're happy to link you to that, and we highly encourage it. Thanks for listening. We understand that what we're doing on this podcast is uncharted territory. We're addressing a topic, pregnancy loss in general, although we've started off with abortion being more specific. Number one, it's not really talked about that much, but even within the church, it's really not talked about at all. Never mind the healing piece of it too. Like there's layers to this. And so we're so thankful for you guys' response, sharing your testimonies, sending DMs, comments, subscribing for one, following the page, all of it. We're super excited. And Becky, it's been fun for you too to kind of see the feedback.
Incredible
it's amazing.
Feedback. A lot more feedback than I was actually anticipating. And I just can't wait to keep this going and just see more of the comments and responses and feedback, like you were saying. So, yeah.
Right. So today's episode, we're talking about grief, but we want to outline it in 2 different ways. So we want to talk about healthy grief and unhealthy grief. So number 1, meaning grief is normal when it comes to abortion. We want to normalize that. There is a loss that happens. So grief and loss is part of the aftermath. But there is a healthy and an unhealthy way to go about that. And we hope that we can bring clarity to that. And as we walk through kind of those details, thinking about where you find yourself. And there might be a mix. There might be a mix of kind of how you're experiencing your grief, or it may be on one side or the other. We don't know. But we want to open up with a quote. And so I'm going to read this quote. This is an incredible quote that comes from this book, Her Choice to Heal. Okay. Highly, highly recommend it. Okay. One of the best abortion healing books I've ever read from a Christian perspective. How do you say her name? Is it SYDNA?
SYDNA. SYDNA MASSE? MASSE?
Yeah. MASSE, maybe. But anyways, we'll put the link in the description below for you guys to purchase this. But we have a quote that comes from this book that I think is going to really hit a lot of people. So here we go. She says, "A woman doesn't have an abortion like she wants an ice cream cone or a Porsche, but like an animal caught in a trap who gnaws off its own leg."
So good. So true.
So we're going to sit in that for a second.
Yeah.
So there's so many different ways that we can kind of unpack that quote, but I wanted to bring it into the episode today on kind of pointing to pain and grief. How does that quote hit you, kind of that last part, like an animal gnawing off its own leg?
You know, it's funny because I went to a business trip just last week, and when you're at an airport, you meet always different kinds of people, and people, always are just trying to make conversation. And one lady goes, "What do you do for a living?" And I love it when people are like, "Yes, I get to tell you what I do."
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm a grief specialist. I'm a director of a HOPE program with Obria Medical Clinics. And I love what I do. And it's for anyone who has any kind of reproductive loss, an abortion, miscarriage, things of that nature, stillbirth, even adoption placement, infertility. Yeah. And when people hear the word abortion, they immediately think that I work for another clinic or not a life-affirming clinic. Okay. But they immediately, one lady, she goes, no one wants an abortion. And I don't even know where she was. But when she heard what I said, she goes, no one is really happy unless you have no soul. And, that you are about to have an abortion or you had an abortion. And I was like, yay, I get to have one. So just hearing that from you, I think every woman, I could be generalizing it.
Sure.
Because I know for myself, you're like, when you're pregnant, you're like, crap, I'm pregnant. And then when you have multiple, crap, I'm pregnant again. How did I get myself into this mess again? So it is something that is a struggle. And we as even Christians still face it every day of our decisions that we have made.
Right. I really appreciate that story too, that one in the airport, because that probably was like a rare moment, right?
Very rare.
But it's truth. It's truth. I think a lot of women, again, the point of bringing this quote up and kind of diving into it this way is speaking to the pain that comes with an abortion, Christian or not. It's typically, I don't want to say always, but typically a decision that you are not excited about making. It's not a position you ever wish to be in as a little girl.
Absolutely.
It's a desperate position to be in. And so I just think this is a very interesting way of kind of depicting that.
Good.
So with that being said, today's episode about grief, and jumping into that, Becky is, a grief specialist, and I'm a marriage and family therapist. And so we really want to bring our expertise together and our testimony and experience on this topic and try to teach a bit, but also share our testimony. And so let's start with what unhealthy grief looks like. So we want to dive into kind of the negative coping mechanisms that might pop up with that. But disenfranchised grief is something that I, to be honest with you, am just now learning about. But it makes total sense. Becky, what is your understanding of that?
Disenfranchised grief is when we grieve, there's memorial services, right? People come up to you and say, I'm sorry for your loss.
Yeah.
You have days off. You go into mourning.
Right.
But that is just grief. But disenfranchised grief is when it's not even acknowledged.
Right.
So when it's not acknowledged, it's like you go into a place of numbness, which is normal. That's a numbness, and you bury it. And you're not going to acknowledge it. I know for myself, and maybe even for you, Brittany, but when I had my abortion, the next day I had to go to work.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's normal, even with miscarriage. I know so many women, you have a miscarriage, you got to go to work. There's no sense of mourning and acknowledging and even telling other people what has happened. That is a am I making that?
Yeah, it makes total sense. I think another way of saying it is kind of like, my pain doesn't matter.
Good.
And that could be messages from the outside. That could be messages from the, so what I mean by outside is people outside of the church, but even inside the church, sometimes we can actually contribute to people having disenfranchised grief because we don't see it as important, or we don't see the weight of it.
No.
So that's definitely a challenging piece.
People say the lamest things when you are mourning, especially when it comes to miscarriage or reproductive loss. I think people just don't understand the do's and don'ts of saying it. We can go on a whole nother episode of that one.
Which we will.
We will. That's a good one.
We will. So yeah, I think I want to kind of backtrack a little bit and maybe do kind of a bigger picture in terms of grief and unhealthy grief. Healthy grief, and tell me if you agree with this, Becky, it kind of dissipates over time. So it's not something that necessarily goes away, right? I still experience grief over the loss of my unborn son, and have moments where I feel that from time to time if things remind me of it or whatever it may be. But over time, it's kind of lessened. There's not a sharpness to that pain as it once was when it first happened. And that's how I know I've been on this track of more of a healthy bereavement, or kind of a healthy process with grief. Unhealthy grief, where it really is challenging, is where that sharpness remains for a very long period of time. But I would say very, very specifically, it's not just the sharpness remains, but the dysfunction that we see in our life as a result of that is also an indicator that it's probably unhealthy grief. So we'll get into that in a second. But I just wanted to note that piece. So let's get into a little bit more of our story. Becky, when you first experienced your abortion, or the abortions you did have, talk a little bit about the grief you experienced and maybe kind of the unhealthy ways you tried to cope with it.
Real Options Obrium Medical Clinics is a nonprofit recognized for its quality of care since 1981. We provide caring, compassionate, high-quality, holistic healthcare with or without insurance, support services, and reproductive loss healing to women, men, students, and families. Real Options has 5 licensed medical clinics in the Bay Area, offering a broad spectrum of prevention, intervention, and restorative services to the community, positively impacting thousands of students and families each year. Go to realoptions.net to learn more.
Well, especially after once I got my second abortion, and I remember coming home, I really don't remember what happened. It's completely still blocked out after the second one. But I remember right about the 6-month mark is when I just couldn't do it anymore. I just cried, and I remember I was drunk. All I could do was morning to night, just drink, because I didn't want to feel the pain.
Yes.
I didn't want to feel it. And I just remember getting into very, very unhealthy relationships. Anything that would cover the sadness and grief that I was feeling. So that was one of the things that I was doing, was drinking heavily. I smoked a lot of pot too.
Okay.
And a lot of very destructive behaviors. I remember one man, unfortunately, who was my neighbor of all things, was completely abusive, and I could not get out of it. And I was just so lonely, and I just needed something. So it was these 3 things. It was abusive relationships for me. It was the drugs and alcohol for me.
Yeah.
Those were the things that it was just a coping mechanism. And I did not know how to get out of this coping mechanism for me.
And praise God, you eventually did. You were set free from that. But thanks for sharing, because you might be finding yourself in that right now. You are feeling incredible amounts of pain.
Good.
You don't know what to do with it. You don't know how to process it. And you're terrified of actually doing that. You're terrified of actually feeling the weight of it. And so you're trying to find things to distract you, things to kind of mask over that pain and help you to feel better. And so you might be resonating and relating to some of the things she's sharing. For me, a little bit different, but still just as unhealthy. Medical neglect. So not taking care of myself, not going to the doctor. So this is for obviously months after the fact, not going to the doctor when I knew I needed to. You know what I mean? Like I just,
totally.
And I think really where that is rooted is you not really feeling like you're worthy of it.
Good.
You don't feel like you're worthy of taking care of yourself or anybody else doing that. You're living in such a self-hatred, I think, and kind of a self-punishment that you neglect yourself in a number of different ways. So that might be like a medical thing. It might be symptoms of depression where you're just not taking care of yourself, like hygiene, things like that, totally. Getting out of the bed, getting out, doing what you normally do. For me, also isolation. Goodness, who knew about my abortion at that time?
Totally.
Goodness, to start off, just my partner. And that took me time to share with others, and we'll get into an episode about that. But isolation was definitely something that was not good for me. It was not a healthy way of me grieving. I think, as Becky said, normal experiences of grief usually happens in community. It's honored in a community setting.
That's right.
And that's what makes it really weird to go through with an abortion. What else? How else did
Well, for me, I remember Eve just going into that.
Yeah.
I had struggled with taking a shower.
Okay.
Just taking a shower.
Totally.
Getting out of bed. Normal things that are just easy, before. After I had my abortions, it was such a struggle to get out of bed.
Yeah. And that's speaking to the mental health piece, kind of symptoms of depression, and things like that. But I think other than that, for me, I didn't really have a lot of memory after the fact either. So to be honest with you, I don't remember everything that I did or didn't do for a large part of the time. And that's part of the brain trying to protect itself from trauma, right, is one of those reasons. So we want you to think about what are the things that you might be engaging in right now that could be unhealthy, that really might have a short-term relief right? Or short-term
Exactly.
kind of medicating yourself, but long-term, deep down, it's not producing good fruit. It's not really helping you heal. And so we want you to kind of reflect on that. Let's kind of flip the page. Positive ways of coping. Maybe it took us time to get there, but things that you eventually started doing that were actually helpful and helped you sit in the grief and heal. What about you, Becky?
Yeah, it took me a while to get there. It actually, even after my marriage is when it really started to happen for me. But one of my first things that I did was I got really involved with my church. That was a huge first step for me. I know it sounds crazy, but, I remember serving. I started serving in the children's ministry, and I started singing up on stage and doing more worship. And that was a really incredible first step. I realized I still got so many flaws. Honestly, no one should have really known what I had done. But I was like, I need to get out of myself. And one of the best ways I did by getting out of myself was helping others. And that is actually called transformative healing. So that was it's a great thing because you're so focused, you're isolated, you're inside yourself. And then when I started helping others, doing something, it really got me out of myself. Another thing I did a lot of reading.
Yeah.
That was a great first thing for me. I read the Bible a ton all the time. That was another great thing that I did. But I think for me, that was one of my first steps of really transformative healing and coping. Yeah.
You and I talked about this kind of offline, was the dangers though of getting really involved in service. Not to say it's a bad thing. Of course, it's what God calls us to do, and there's a reason for that, right?
Absolutely.
And it could be definitely part of our healing. But we also have people who may be really outward focused and, in serving, or maybe it's in work, in school, in other things, right? But let's be honest, there's a piece of you that's just trying to stay busy.
Yes.
Because you don't want to actually face the pain.
But you can also go in the other direction. Like, it's almost like a penance. Like, all right, Lord, I'm going to do this and this and this. See what I'm doing, Lord? I'm leading this. I'm leading. And that's how I was to that other extreme. Like, see, Lord, I'm doing great things for you. Let's not look at my abortion, even though he'd forgotten about it. Of course, I didn't. So and that's where the self-forgiveness comes in. Yes. Yeah.
And Becky's meaning that, the word says that God forgives our sins, but he also forgets them. Which is an incredible act of grace.
Yes.
So yeah. Definitely. I think for me, positive coping skills, eventually speaking up and speaking out about it with trusted people, people in the church, friends that I trusted. Basically, it's taking my pain and looking at it head on, taking my grief and looking at it head on.
Good.
I think a way to kind of gauge this is, how do we know we're in a place of unhealthy grief, or how do we know we're in a place of unhealthy coping mechanisms? Are you actually looking your pain in the face? Are you actually looking at your trauma in the face, looking at yourself in the mirror, and doing that work? That's how we know. It's difficult work.
It's so hard.
But it's definitely necessary.
She acts like, we even were saying, I'm thinking, it's so hard. Even now, with all the healing that I've done, still trying to face the pain and the grief. I have my good days and I have my bad days, like everybody. You know what I'm saying? So
definitely triggers that pop up, things like that. Towards the end of this episode, stick around. Make sure you watch the end, because we're going to jump into some more detailed stuff in terms of the mental health piece. But in terms of positive things that I was doing, so it was reaching out to other people. You know what? To be honest with you, I think that might be the only one I can remember right now.
Reaching out to people?
I think that was the only one, of just getting community. Getting community.
It really is.
I don't know what else really worked for me. I think for me, it was because it was such a secret and it was eating me alive. And so I think the Lord knew that me getting it out was the first step of healing and honestly a big piece of it. And everything just like snowballed from there. Positive things came from that.
Yeah, me too.
I think that's a fear for you maybe right now. It's just like, just saying it is going to be really hard. But the Lord can do great things with that obedience. Next episode, though, make sure you watch it. We're going to give you some tips and tools on how to actually do that in a safe way. Okay. Yeah. Any other positive things? Any coping skills you want to kind of shout out there? I mean,
exercise, but we can go on to the other extreme. But again, being just like going out in the sun. That's one of the things I talk to a lot of women who come in and they're very depressed. I'm like, you have to sometimes get out of yourself.
Oh, yeah.
You know, when was the last time you just went on a walk in the sun? So for me, that was a huge first step.
Yeah.
And for me, I had a young daughter.
Oh,
she was 3 or 4. She was my saving grace. I mean, she was always so happy and sweet.
Of course.
You know, a lot of my focus went to my daughter. And that could be good and bad, but I'm just saying that focus in it.
Yeah.
You know, I think when I was in a bad place with my abortions, I was mothering kind of, what's that word where not empty, but I was kind of going through the motions as a mother.
Yeah.
But once I started to get more healing, I was going to church, I was going to Bible studies, my mothering became deeper. I began to be more connective with my daughter.
Okay.
And I could start receiving her love in a different way because especially when you're in that self-hatred mode,
that's
you
really
feel,
good.
I don't deserve you even, you know, I don't deserve to be a mother. She doesn't even know what happened. So
goodness.
Yeah. So there was that was going always in my head all the time. So that was a great first step in. And I remember even, I will never forget when Zoe was in kindergarten. I was just on that cusp of really finding healing. You don't realize the impact that you have on your children in healing. She had to do this memorabilia of a mother's thing, like this is what my mom does and all these things. And she went through all these things and she put on there. Now, this is a secular kindergarten, whatever, that I love Judge Judy, which I never talked to her about Judge Judy, but she put on there that I love Judge Judy. She put on there the Bible.
Beautiful.
She put on there worship. She put on there coffee. But, and I remember, I'm like, yes. But you don't, it's funny because in that year, I was so intentional about reading the word and so into worship that it was an impact on her.
Yes.
So that healing that I was taking was also healing her as well. And I was receiving her love.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I think, let us know if you want us to do an episode on the complexities of going through this healing process as you already have kids. Because we know the statistics show that a lot of you probably already have a family, and that makes it even harder. So we might do something like that.
Yeah.
I want to take a minute side note, what Becky was talking about was feeling like a shell of a person. I felt like lifeless after my abortion.
Absolutely.
Couldn't receive much, couldn't give much, just a shell, empty. And so I think that's what Becky was describing.
Real Options OBM Medical Clinics is a nonprofit recognized for its quality of care since 1981. We provide caring, compassionate, high-quality, holistic healthcare with or without insurance, support services, and reproductive loss healing to women, men, students, and families. Real Options has 5 licensed medical clinics in the Bay Area, offering a broad spectrum of prevention, intervention, and restorative services to the community, positively impacting thousands of students and families each year. Go to realoptions.net to learn more.
Just for a minute, this is so important. A destructive coping mechanism that women might find themselves in is actually a cycle of abortion.
Exactly. Preach it.
Becky, you've come across a lot of women like this.
Including myself.
Yes, who've had multiple abortions. But really, when we dig deeper, we can actually find that there's probably a pattern at play. There's some type of destructive pattern at play that's happening. And so first off, grace and mercy, right? Like we don't want to talk about this topic in a way that feels condemning. If that's where you are, where you find yourself, But again, this podcast is really about looking in the mirror and really trying to invite God into the healing. So just want to make that note. But Becky, talk a bit about kind of that pattern that you see women who are stuck in the cycle of abortion and that being potentially kind of an unhealthy or pointing to them being an unhealthy place.
Yeah, it's so easy. And actually, the cycle of the abortion started before the abortions. It always does. And we do talk about that a lot in our retreats, as you know. But it was such a destructive behavior before the abortions because I was having a lot of unprotected sex. That is a great, not abusive, but destructive behavior was unprotected sex.
It can be, and there might be debates on that, but let's be honest.
That's true. There will be debates, but I had a lot of that. And I remember when I got pregnant for the first time, I did have my daughter, but when I got pregnant again and then had my abortion, that it was pregnancy. So I was like first pregnancy, second pregnancy, third pregnancy. So now we're going on this cycle. So when I got to the second pregnancy, I'm like, and then I had my abortion. That's when I was already there beforehand. Self-destructive behavior of abusive relationships and drinking and partying.
Okay.
And then
that's the pattern.
That was it. But I didn't know how to get out of it because I didn't want to feel anything.
Right.
You know?
Right. Gosh.
I didn't want to feel anything. So when I got into my third pregnancy, again, you don't want to feel anything. So, and you don't know how to get out of it. So these are how it starts. But I really believe the cycle of abortion, that begins before abortion. Because there is a root of that.
So that makes sense. Thank you for unpacking that. So that's complicated, and that probably could be an episode on its own. So yeah. I also want to make this abundantly clear, if this isn't clear already. Therapy is definitely a positive coping, a way of, learning how to cope well. And I want that to be a given across every episode that we have. Let that be a given. But we will remind you, please go to therapy. Okay, so we're going to kind of review what we've talked about today and kind of get to some other things too before we end. But I'm going to read something off, so just don't mind me as I'm kind of reading. But unhealthy grief leads to unhealthy ways of coping. That's essentially what we're trying to teach you today. Destructive ways to expressing emotion essentially is what Becky's talked about today too. So that's suppressing the pain, in denial of what's happened or what the patterns were. Substance abuse, we talked about that. Medical neglect, abusive relationships, numbing, eating disorders. Eating disorders is something that can easily happen. And
absolutely.
So there's a lot to be said on that and unpacked. But just if you're out there and that's something that you're wrestling with, just know that can be something that people fall into. And unprotected sex and all the other things that Becky rattled off
general.
As I guess we could say that too. It's a whole nother topic.
That's a whole nother topic.
But yeah. And so to contrast that, what is healthy grief? Healthy grief is essentially what we're saying is a release of emotion. It's getting it out, but in a healthy way, using healthy coping skills, kind of looking yourself in the mirror, reflecting on it, inviting God into it. Right. Yes. Is essentially what that is all about.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. So that's basically a picture of what we want you to reflect on today. I
want to just stop for a second because that saying that says time heals all wounds.
Yeah.
It really doesn't. Time. There is I maybe we can put it up on this thing, but we do this at a retreat. We show this page where you see all these jars and these little balls in each jar, and people think that time heals all wounds. But what happens is the jar just gets bigger, but the ball stays the same. The ball is grief. The jar is us. Yeah. All we do is we just know how to grieve in a different way as time starts. We grow around our grief in a different way. So, and that is grief right there. Just healthy or unhealthy, so I just wanted to go into that.
And hopefully we can maybe display that maybe on our Instagram page. If you're not following us,
that's a good idea.
Follow us, you can get that.
We could put it over too.
Okay, yeah, definitely.
Well, that's a good
so we'll do
idea.
that for you guys. But Yeah, no, I appreciate you mentioning that, Becky. It's a great visual.
Yeah.
So what is God's will? God's will, number one, is to save you from your sin, right? The good news of the gospel, number one. What we're trying to help you recognize, too, is that he actually wants to, there's a saving work that happens, right? Like the cross still saves us after the fact. And that's in our healing from our emotional wounds, healing from our traumas, healing from the consequences of our sins.
Yep.
Right? And God is passionate about stepping in to help you with that.
Even healing from our memories.
Yeah.
There's healing from our memories, that God can heal our memories.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I think the reality, though, that we are faced with this grief is, are you going to face it? And I think about God's will for Jesus was to basically lead him to the cross, to die, to suffer. You know what I mean? To die a humiliating death. And so I think I don't know, it's just a thought that's coming up for me as I've been reflecting on this episode, is like, God wants you to heal, but he also understands that very act may actually lead you to more pain. But the thing is, that pain is actually refining you, though. That pain is not, it's a different type of pain.
It is. It's a
different type of pain, because healing hurts. And the reason why it hurts is because you have to take a deep dive into yourself. You have to feel the emotions. That's why it hurts. But healing also works as a result of that. And so, hope that makes sense.
Feel it to heal it.
Yes.
Feel it to heal it.
Yes, God can't heal you from things you're unwilling to confront. That is just
good,
the
Britt.
Basic truth.
That's
he can't
exactly
heal you if you're
right.
not willing to confront it. And so we say that as an encouragement, because I know this is heavy. If you just had your abortion yesterday or last week and you found yourself, coming across this content, this might sound like a lot. Okay, but recognize we are far from the beginning of our journey, and so we're trying to share wisdom, but we're also trying to encourage you in that too.
Yes,
Yeah.
From experience, from my own experiences, and from talking to so many families and women and marriages and students who just had an abortion. Now, again, I will even say this. I've talked to women who had an abortion yesterday and they're in shock.
Total shock.
But I've also talked to women who had an abortion 10 years ago, and it almost like they're in such denial. They're almost in the same shock that they were in, when they had it yesterday, because they never dealt with it, just like you said.
Right.
They haven't faced it. They were in this cycle that they just couldn't get out of. And so they went into the numbing stage.
Definitely. Yeah, there's definitely stages to it. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to close our episode today. But before we do that, I'm going to, like I said earlier, I want to introduce something really briefly, and then we're just going to leave you with some encouragement. But there's something called post-abortion syndrome. And it's not an official diagnosis, in the DSM or when it comes to mental health disorders, but it's a form of PTSD that you might be experiencing. I'm going to read briefly some of the symptoms that might be popping up. If you find yourself resonating with this, here's what I want you to do. Essentially reach out for help. Okay? Pray, ask God to help you, but I want you to reach out for help. All right, so uncontrolled negative re-experiencing of the abortion death event, flashbacks, nightmares, grief, anniversary reactions, unsuccessful attempts to avoid or deny abortion recollections and emotional pain, which result in reduced responsiveness to others in one's environment. This may sound really like fancy language, but I hope you're sticking with me.
It is fancy language, yeah, it is.
Yeah, experiencing associated symptoms not present before the abortion. So this might include guilt for surviving it, which may sound interesting, but it can happen, right? So there's an inability for the person to process the fear, anger, sadness, and guilt surrounding the abortion experience, grieving the loss of her baby, and an inability to come to peace with God about it, or herself, or others involved in the abortion decision. So this is just a brief description of what you might be experiencing. Bottom line is you experience a trauma, and you're having a response to that. So we appreciate you joining us for this episode today. We did some teaching today. We did some teaching, but we also prayed that this would be encouraging to you as well. So please join us on our next episode. Subscribe, comment, follow, all the things, and continue on this journey with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey guys, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe our YouTube channel. You can also find us on all types of social media platforms at P2G Podcast. So it's Instagram, Facebook, we're on Spotify, TikTok. Across all platforms and all streaming platforms. I want to thank you so much for watching. Make sure you click on any of these videos here to check out all the other content we have. Thanks.